good morning to a new week, a new Thursday where we meet for the routing loop. Today I'm joined by Tom and Avi, and thank you all for joining us in the chat. We have very exciting topics to talk about today. But before we get there, Tom, Avi, let's go through intros. Tom, you want to start?
Sure. Hey, everybody. You guys have probably seen me on previous shows. I'm one of the moderators. But today I'm more coming in as just a regular Joe, coming in as an audience member, asking questions and curious about what we've launched. I was kind of out the last 3 days. So I caught up a little bit on the launches, but I'm kind of curious I have my own questions to ask Abby, who owns the service. So I'm excited.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yep. I'll be the moderator today. So I'm Alex, network specialist, solutions architect at AWS, one of the team members of the routing loop, and we are here every Thursday. And we're joined by Avi. So Avi, go for it.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Avi Maras. I'm the product manager for EC2 VPC. My focus areas are mostly networking within AWS. So anything that's to do with VPC, how routing happens within VPC, encryption, security, etc. Excited to talk about today's topic, which is security groups here. A little bit more about my background. So I've been here for about 3 years now, and most of those time spent on VPC. And prior to that, I was at Facebook Connectivity for a few years. And prior to that, I've been on enterprise networking space. So pretty much networking background throughout the career and kind of different parts of the networking. But right now, focus more on like VPC side of things.
That's awesome, man. You've been around for a long time. Very cool.
It feels shorter than actually it is.
It's AWS years, like when you're like 4 years or 5 years in AWS,
Reverse dog years.
30 years. Cool stuff. Okay, so today we are introducing Amazon VPC Security Group associations and sharing two new features for security groups. Abhi and the team have worked really hard on getting these features launched. We've heard your feedback. So we're going to be talking a bit about this feature, these two features actually. We're going to do a demo. Hopefully the demo gods are going to be helping us today and not messing with our configuration. And we're going to be answering all your questions. So please do go ahead and put your questions in the chat. Looking forward to seeing our very familiar faces. Not yet in the chat, but hopefully everyone gets a slower Thursday start. It's Halloween today, actually, so we should have worn costumes. Happy Halloween, happy Diwali, all the celebrations. Happy holidays today, I would say to everyone who's joined us. Tom, what are you getting costumed in tonight?
I am not. So I dressed up last year. I was going to a party and I dressed up as Wolverine, which was I thought it was going to be an easy outfit, right? Because all I need is a wig, a cigar, and I could wear a jacket and jeans and kind of look normal. And I got these like claws. But then when I was going into the venue, they wouldn't let me in with my claws, even though they were plastic. I had to take them off and put it on a pile of all the other weapons that people couldn't bring into the party. So they were like plastic axes and swords and all sorts of different weaponry. But it meant that when I got inside, I just looked like, I don't know, a guy in a wig and a cigar with no clothes. It made no sense at all. So yeah, I'm giving up on going to a Halloween party this Halloween. Just taking it easy.
That sounds really funny. Yep. Last year I was costumed as a policewoman. And they took my what are those called? The handcuffs at the entrance. I'm like, I kind of like those handcuffs. So why are you taking them away from me? But yeah, I feel you. So this year I'm getting costumed as a witch. Talking about witches, we're gonna get to reinvent in a second. But Abby, what is your plan for Halloween costumes?
I'm always late to order my things and get things. So I'm always like foraging my wardrobe and seeing what I have. So this time I'm Clark Kent because my costume didn't come in time, which is a pretty simple costume. Just wear a suit and I have my sunglasses, so I popped out the shades in it, so it just looks like a thick frame.
Nice.
So I'm just gonna be Clark Kent.
Nice. Really
That's a
cool.
good idea. Yeah, I've done it before. It's a great idea because all you can do is just like open your shirt
Yeah,
and
exactly.
take your glasses off.
And I have like a T-shirt which has a Superman thing on it. So you just had to open up a few buttons and that's it.
That's so cool. Awesome. Well, hope you all have an awesome party tonight. Back to the wizards and witches part. I will do a shameless promotion of my reinvent session, Matt and I reinvent session. You folks probably know already, and if you don't, search in the reinvent portal, advanced VPC design and new VPC capabilities. It's Net 301. We've been doing this session for a lot of years now. I think this one is the fourth year where we're doing it together, but Matt had been doing it before that. We got a bigger room, so we have more space. So go ahead and book your seat, reserve your seat, and see you there at reInvent on Monday afternoon. It's the first time we're actually having the session on Monday. We used to have it on Friday, so really excited about it. I'm looking forward to seeing you all there. Tom, you'll be there too, right?
Yep. Yeah, I have a session also on Monday. Somehow we're all doing sessions on Monday. A lot of the networking content is gonna drop on Monday. My session is gonna be on routing, so taking you through anything to do with routing from individual VPC ingress routing, more specific routing, to then talking about how routing works in other scenarios, kind of going beyond the VPC. Yeah, I'm surprised we got so much content. I'm realizing when we're building this content for reInvent, I'm realizing how much stuff we're starting to have. Like I think networking now has 45 services, and it becomes super hard to just have one session and cover it all, even if we're just zooming in on one aspect like networking. Sorry, like routing. So yeah, so we got to start figuring out better ways to start chopping up the content into bits that can fit into the right category.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that makes
there's
sense.
a lot of exciting stuff happening. It's hard to pack it all in a short duration.
Yeah.
Can't wait. A lot of good stuff coming in the next weeks. We can talk about roadmap on the show, but I'm really excited. And security group, VPC associations and sharing is one of those super exciting launches we've all been waiting for quite some time. So let's jump right in. Should we go through like an overview of what security groups are to begin with, and how customers are using them, what their role is in AWS? Tom, Abhi, who wants to,
Yeah,
who wants to give
I
it a
can.
shot at this?
Yeah, I can quickly go over, and of course, Tom is the expert here. He'll have more color to add. But on a very high level, I mean, think about security groups. I think pretty much everyone's aware of security groups. It's been there for a very long time, since we've had VPCs and even before. So security groups are more like stateful virtual firewalls for your EC2 instances and services. They are sort of the lowest form of control that you can apply on an instance or a workload. They have both inbound and outbound rules, so you can say what traffic comes in and what traffic goes out. And they are allow-only rules, right? Unlike NACLs or network ACLs, where you can have both allow and deny rules, security groups you can have allow-only rules. So by default, everything is blocked unless you explicitly allow them. Then it will be allowed both in inbound or outbound directions. And they're kind of mandatory for all instances to have a security group, so you can't get away without having one. We have built a lot of interesting features on security groups. So for example, referencing is one of the interesting things we have done, where you can cross-reference a security group as a rule in another security group. And very recently, we launched another feature, which was transit gateway security group referencing, which means that you can reference a security group even though those two VPCs are connected over a transit gateway. So in addition to peering, now we support transit gateway as a connection mechanism to reference security groups between two VPCs. So that's kind of in a very high nutshell what security groups are. Of course, and a very important feature, a very foundational feature, and it is used across several services, and there's a lot of features that the services have built around security groups as well. And I'm sure we'll talk about some of those as we go on here.
Yeah, so I feel like security groups have this very interesting double function, right? Because one is they act as this firewall, so deciding what am I allowing to connect to me and what am I allowed to connect to. But the second function is it's kind of like a tag, like an identifier. So I have a security group wrapped around the resource. It's not only controlling access to that resource, but also tagging that resource with that security group ID. And that's where that referencing kicks in. So I feel like that's like we always talk about it as a firewall, but that fact that it's also I don't know, a tagger identifier, it's like a label that then can be used and referenced. I think that's a super cool thing. And I sometimes run into customers that don't realize this existed. And they're like, what? I don't have to set up IP addresses. I can just reference a security group already configured elsewhere.
Yeah.
Let's do a bit of whiteboarding. I think we're at the point where we're talking about abstract things and everyone's like, wait, a tag, an identifier? How? What? What are you talking about? What is that? So we have a VPC. You all know that when you create a VPC, you get a default VPC security group, right? So that default security group comes with the VPC. It's by default associated with all resources unless you configure your own custom security groups. So let's assume we have a VPC and we have this resource. This resource is living in a subnet, right? So let's say we have a subnet here. Security groups are not the only VPC security construct, right? We also have something for subnets.
Yes, we do.
Okay, cool. So subnets come with NACLs, which are the network access control lists. They're subnet level filters. They're stateless, which means that they don't have a way to track connections. They don't know if packets are part of a connection that's already established. So inbound and outbound rules need to be specified to allow traffic independently. And around these resources in the subnets, we have these security groups. Oh man, this is an interesting shape here. Let's do a nicer shape. Let's say security group 1, 2, 3 that we have defined around our resource. Tom, you were talking about the security group acting as an identifier or an identity or a tag, and you talked about referencing. Should we go over what are the places where you can reference these security groups? So you can reference them inside the same VPC, right? So if I have another resource here, even in the same subnet or in a different subnet, I can do security group referencing within the VPC, correct?
Yep. And then maybe you can show that the first security group actually can have more than one resource. I don't know if it will let you extend that security group 1, 2, 3.
Oh yeah,
that's also a cool thing, right? So you can span that security group around, wrap it around whatever resources you want.
Yeah.
And now you're not only controlling access to and from those resources, but now traffic coming from those resources will be tagged with the security group 1, 2, 3.
And if you want individual, like separate security groups, you can also put security group 4, 5, 6 here for just this specific resource. And that's also totally fine. Let's give some names to these resources, resource A, B, and C. So let's say resource C has security group. I'm running out of numbers.
789. Let's go 789.
Okay, and here's where I can reference, right? I can reference security group in the inbound rules between 1, 2, 3 and 789. So for this one in inbound, can I reference both inbound and outbound? I think so, right?
Yep, you can.
Cool. So inbound rules, let's say here, allow SG123 on TCP port 80, for example, right? Which means that both resource A and resource B can now access my resource C, right? Can open connections on TCP port 80. Cool. So referencing inside the same VPC. You folks mentioned that I can reference on VPCs that are peered, and I can
Alex,
also...
before we jump, there's a good question here that we can maybe explore a little bit deeper before we jump through. So,
Oh yeah, let's do it.
yeah, Chris Fack is asking about the nesting of security groups. I don't think we talk about it a lot in our sessions. So I think when you shown this and you showed, okay, 1, 2, 3 is around 2 resources, but then we're adding 4, 5, 6. I think that's an interesting thing to explore because, can there be any conflicts, and how do we think about quotas and limits on how many entries you can have? So I wonder if we want to explore that a little bit. And then maybe you can, the second part of the question, it's yes, you can span different subnets because security group can span anything in the region. But maybe it's worth showing that as an example as well, so you can see it in the drawing.
Yep. I'll do an interesting example here. So let me delete security group 456 and let me create it again as a security group that's around these resources. I'll make this nicer, I promise. Just to get you folks to see that security groups and subnets don't necessarily have a relation between themselves, right? So security groups can span or can be associated with resources that are across multiple subnets, right? Let me delete these lines here and make them a bit nicer.
Yep.
So
And I guess the follow-up questions would be, how does it, or resource B, can there be any conflicting rules on that resource B? Right, because there's 2 security groups now associated with resource B. How does that look like?
Yep. So, Abhi, do you wanna take that? So let's say that security group here 1, 2, 3 says allow any,
So
let's say in
Oh,
while
you
you're doing
gotta do
that, I think
V6. I see. Interesting.
that was a nice plugin.
right.
The thing, you also mentioned NACL before. So one of the big differences between NACLs and security groups, apart from, of course, NACLs being stateless and security groups being stateful, where it knows the state and what traffic and what direction it's going and coming from, is that NACLs are allow and deny rules, where you had explicitly say what is allowed and denied, versus in security groups, it's allow only. So everything is blocked by default unless you're actually allowing a particular traffic. So if you're nesting, or I guess in this case, attaching 2 security groups to a particular, say, ENI, or even referencing, for example, because they're allow only rules, typically there's no conflict because one rule is not saying allow and the other one is not saying deny. Because it's allow only, what could happen is you're expanding your access. So we're making the pipe bigger, if you will, but there's no conflict that could happen in case of security groups. And that's why we are able to reference them without having to worry about any sort of conflicting rules in this case, because what could happen is maybe we'll expand the CIDR, or we'll add more protocols for that particular CIDR, etc. But not necessarily conflict per se.
Yeah.
So if we look at resource B and look at that port 80 in Alex's example, what are we allowing to connect to resource B?
Yeah. So in this case, we are allowing port 80 in SG123. And then in the inbound rules, we're allowing, basically, in the rule, we're basically referencing SG123 port 80. So basically, we are allowing resource B, everything that's port 80, all the traffic comes in. So all of that port 80 traffic is allowed. And it's V6 only.
Yeah, exactly. This one is broader than this one. So one is more specific, one is broader. the broader one wins.
Yeah.
Okay.
And for those who might not be able to read, this is just basically saying allow anything over IPv6 to port 80, right?
Well,
much.
we gotta get to the IPv6 part here. The ::/0 is the analogous in IPv6 of the 0.0.0.0/0 in IPv4. And I think this is the one thing that's easier to write in IPv6 than it is in IPv4. In IPv4, you have a bunch of zeros. In IPv6, you just have two columns and a /0. So yes, you'll see me do a lot of that in whiteboards. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So security group referencing, nesting security groups. We kind of have this already on our diagram.
I guess we keep talking about stateless and stateful. Maybe it's worth also like explain what does that mean in the context of security group, because I know there's some confusion I've seen with some customers on, okay, what does it mean stateless and stateful in this context, right? So we have those inbound rules. What does it mean from the stateful perspective there?
Should we whiteboard the TCP connection setup?
I don't know if we need to go that deep, but I think just
Yeah.
explaining that there's a, if you have a connection, there's a flow, there's a
Yeah.
client server connection, there's a request and response
Yeah.
situation.
On a very high level, I think the difference between stateful and stateless is, as the name suggests, in stateful, a flow, when I say a flow, a traffic that is flowing from, say, an instance to another instance, it will know that particular flow and that particular direction of the flow. So when the traffic comes back, it has context of that particular flow, whether it was allowed, whether it was denied, and if it was allowed, the return traffic is going to get the same treatment. In case of stateless, it's sort of not keeping track of those flows, which is basically making a decision. Okay, what does my NACL say? Does it say this particular IP address, source, this particular destination, allow or deny, and it's going to just make action. So there's no context for that particular flow, and there's no context to the direction as well. And as you can imagine, something that is stateful, because it has context and it has to store that context for a particular duration, because traffic goes back and forth and it has a life. There is this context that needs to be stored, processed, etc. So it's more intensive to do a stateful filtering as opposed to stateless filtering, which is more like making a on-the-fly decision on what do I need to do with this particular packet. So it's more intensive. Stateful firewalls or rules are more intensive than stateless.
But it means we only have to care about allowing traffic in one direction, because the stateful firewall is going to keep track of that connection and go, I've already allowed a request, so I will allow the response automatically. You don't have to explicitly define that this response traffic is allowed.
Exactly.
But that comes as a quote unquote price, right? This connection tracking, we have to keep track of connections depending on how permissive the security group rule is. But if it's pretty restricted, there's actually a limit that's kicking in there, like a quota, right? That's each instance, EC2 instance, might have on the number of connections that it can keep track of.
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic problem, right? You can't have it all. So the challenge with some of these stateful rules is that it takes resources to keep track of these, and also we have limited hardware. I mean, end of the day, these are resources that are borrowing from hardware somewhere, so there are some limitations there. Now, to Tom's point, the more explicit your rules are and the more number of rules that you are trying to enforce, the more expensive it is in terms of hardware or in terms of resources in general, let's say, not necessarily hardware, but it's more expensive. So if you have one rule that says, hey, allow port 80, all v6 port 80, it's better than saying allow only /24 or only allow 10 dot slash something and then allow so 172 slash something. So the more rules you have, the more expensive it gets. So broader rules are definitely less intensive because the number of rules are smaller and less connections to track.
just want to make one quick clarification here. And when you mention expensive, Abhi, there's no cost associated to
Oh, that's
security groups on AWS. They
Yes.
come naturally with your resources. The expensive part here is referring to the fact that it is consuming processing cycles essentially, and keeping tracking of connections and sort of resource expensive, not money expensive. So
Yep, I need to be careful of the words I choose.
yeah.
That's right.
Like
So
it-
yeah, just to clarify, security groups are free. They will continue to be free. Yeah, like Alex mentioned, when we say expensive, we're just talking about um, CPU or hardware or virtual resources that are not an unlimited capacity, but it's more an engineering problem, not a design or a cost problem for the customer or anyone who's using AWS. It's an internal engineering problem.
Cool stuff. Okay, so for everyone who keeps joining us, I see the audience here is a bit increasing. We're talking about the two new features that we've launched yesterday.
Yesterday,
For
yeah.
security groups, VPC associations, and sharing. So, before we jump into the two features, we were talking a bit about what are security groups on AWS, how we can use them, security group referencing. I think we left off at security group referencing outside of the VPC, and how these security groups act not just as stateful firewalls, right, around your resources, but also as identifiers because of the security group referencing. And I think probably the best example to close off on the referencing part is, imagine here you have an auto scaling group that continues to scale up and down. You associate the security group with the auto scaling group, and then you reference that security group into other security groups that those resources need to have access to. And after that, you don't need to worry anymore. With every single IP that comes up or changes, or an instance gets torn down, you don't have to track those IPs. You don't have to say, oh, IP1 changed. I have to now go into the inbound rules of the target security group and I add that individual IP. Right. So it's a very very interesting and an optimized way to implement microsegmentation at small scale. Right. Now, security group referencing. We can use it inside the VPC. We can use it across peered VPCs. So if we have a VPC peer here, peered VPCs inside the same region though, right?
Correct. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Peering. So let's say that I put my my another resource here. I told you guys I'm running out of numbers. So this is going to be
ABC, maybe start using letters.
ABC. Yep. And I can, for example, reference security group 123 here inbound into security group ABC, which means resources that have security group 123 associated with them can open connections on TCP port 80, let's say, to my resource C. And we've recently launched security group referencing over TGW attachments, correct?
Yep, we did.
I think this was probably one of the most requested features on TGW, if I'm not mistaken. I think of another one that might have beaten this one, which is dynamic routing. But I think this one was one of the top ones. So
Yeah. I think I remember it was a big concern when customers were migrating from peering to transit gateway.
yeah,
Right, and in peering, they might have already set up a lot of security group referencing to allow traffic between VPCs or between resources in the VPCs. And then moving to transit gateway, referencing no longer worked, and they had to move to using IP addresses and subnet ranges and so on. So which is a bit less scalable and more operationally intensive to keep track of what you want to allow.
yeah.
And it's interesting, right, how some of these features makes managing these security groups easier. That when you don't have it on a new form a connection, you will understand the impact. So I think for a lot of those customers who are so used to referencing within peering, made life so easy that not having it on transit gateway was a huge deal breaker. I'm glad we support that now. There are some differences though between the two. Just want to call out that I think transit gateway supports inbound only referencing. So just want to call that out.
I think there's one other thing to keep an eye out on is when security group referencing no longer works is also if you put a security appliance in the middle. Right, so if off your transit gateway you hang off something that's doing firewalling behind the gateway load balancer, whether it's your own deployment or if it's a third-party vendor that you bring in, or if inside the same VPC you want to add inspection using a third-party firewall between subnets, your security group referencing will no longer work. So that's something to bear in mind.
Yep, but really important. This is not what our features are about, right?
This is still the basics. And actually, we have a question from Frank L81.
Yeah.
About Lattice and how this plays with Lattice. I guess
really important. I think we can probably dive into Lattice and talk about it for the next 2 hours. We won't have that much time, but very important. If you folks remember, on the Lattice model, you have the client and you have the service network and you have services. Let's say that this is a service 1 and this is service 2 and this is service 3. When the client here talks to Lattice, it talks to IP addresses of, so IP destination is Lattice IP, right? You have a security group here on the association. You can actually have up to 4 or 5, I think. But this is just so you can use security group referencing here to specify who in the VPC can access VPC Lattice service network. It's not about putting security group referencing all the way between the client and the service. And the reason for it is because Lattice completely abstracts the client from the service. They don't know about IPs of each other. They don't know about security groups of each other. They only know that they are allowed to talk to Lattice and receive traffic from Lattice. And beyond that, the control is where security comes in and the auth policies come in at the service network level and at the service level. And these are identity-based policies, right? So they allow you to filter traffic between sources and destinations or clients and services on much more information and more granular identity-based information rather than just security groups, which are IP-based, essentially. And here's my cat. Awesome.
Yeah, we can hear it a little bit like scrounging up there. I think you're using your other mic, so we could hear it like.
Yes. I had a small technical difficulty this morning. I could not connect my my normal headphones to the laptop, so now I have my laptop mic on, which means that you can probably hear everything and see everything. Say hi to the camera with me, and please behave and be a good girl. Cool.
That's not how it works with cats. I have cats and they will not obey. Oh, she's already on the table.
That's not how it works indeed, because she's back on the table. So yeah, hope that answers your question, Frank. And I see Dominic who joined us. Thank you. Awesome. Cool. So coming back to security groups and coming back to our 2 new features. Security group referencing. Abhi, what is the first feature we need to talk about today?
Yeah. Before we get into the features, let's talk about what are some of the challenges with all this that we have. Now, I think as Alex was drawing this thing, some of the things you probably observed is that your security group, most of them, actually all of them, are inside the green boundary, right? Like you have a VPC and all security groups are created today within that VPC. We are talking about referencing in this case, but you can't just use a security group as is in a different VPC, right? So every security group is attached at the hip to a VPC. So if you want to go create a new security group, you had to go do that in another VPC, which will be a new security group ID that you will have to use across your resources, even if they are very similar. So that's, I think, one. I
You
wouldn't say
folks can
limitation, but
see
that's one
here
benefit.
that before you go further, Abby, you folks can see here that I have different security group IDs. So it's
Yep.
SGABC, SG123. It's not SG123, even if it has the same rules.
Yep.
It still needs to be a different security group ID.
Correct. And the other I wouldn't say challenge today is also that, or not necessarily the way it works today, is that these security groups are also tied to an account, right? So if you have an account A that is creating all this security groups, it still belongs to account A and it's within that boundary. So an account B cannot just go ahead and use those security groups, even though they're sharing subnets between them. They have to go and create their own security groups, and that's how it works today. Now, for some of the customers or use cases or workloads where, for example, I have multiple VPCs. Let's say I have a sandbox doing a bunch of things, and then I have a pre-stage, then I have a prod, and I have a bunch of other VPCs for different purposes. But if my security requirements are somewhat similar between them, they may have some nuances, but for the most part, if they are same, I can't just reuse these security groups, right? I'll have to go to each of my VPCs, go ahead and create security groups. And if I need to make a change, let's say I added a new resource, I need to open up a new CIDR or a new protocol or a new port number, I'll have to go and make sure that all of these security groups across all these VPCs are synced between each other, which is a challenge in itself, right? It's mostly a management problem, but to some extent, it's also a security/access problem. It could have difference in experiences between VPC to VPC. Things might look great when you pre-stage in your pre-stage and sandbox VPC, but when you go to prod, things don't work because there was a rule somewhere that was missed, or there was a reference somewhere that was referencing to some of the security group, and the port number was wrong. So you could end up in these kind of situations with how it works today. So we looked at some of these challenges, and what we did is we launched a new feature yesterday called Security Group VPC Associations. So essentially what that means is you have a security group that you already are using. It's already there in your VPC. You go ahead and create a new VPC, or you already have a new VPC, and you just want to use that security group as is. You don't want to make any changes. Let's say it's a foundational security group. You're allowing certain set of things that doesn't change often, or even if it changes, it applies across all VPCs. You can now associate that security group outside of that VPC in any other VPC that you own or that account owns. So essentially, in this case, let's say you have security group 123. You can use that security group 123 in VPC A, VPC B, VPC C, for example. So you can associate to multiple VPCs. So it'll avoid recreating that security group. It's the same security group ID. So if you go and make any changes within that, it immediately applies across all the VPCs that this is attached to, all the resources that this particular security group is attached to.
Let's talk to that, because this is a great feature introduction, but I can already hear my wheels spinning and saying, oh, wait. So wait, what are we doing here exactly? Where are we? So if I'm changing a security group rule, it impacts everyone. So let's go through that step by step. So you mentioned that if I have an account and I have a region and I have a security group that's already created and used, let's say I'm using it as in my drawing here on these two resources, I can now take the security, by default, the security group is created in the VPC, right? So it's associated with the VPC.
Yep.
I can now go and take the security group and also associate it with this VPC and with this VPC.
That is right.
Awesome. Can I associate it with VPCs in another account in the same region?
It depends if you're sharing the subnet or not. But let's say these accounts are independent of each other. They're not sharing any subnets. Then no, you cannot.
Not sharing any subnets.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Now, one of the things I want to call out also is that this is not a new security group or security group flavor or type. This is your existing security groups that are already there, or that will ones that you create newly, that can be associated with additional VPCs. So it's not a new resource or resource type. It's an existing resource that's already there, and these you may already have them. You're just using that across VPCs.
So I can go into my account and look at the security groups, and I'll have additional options now to be able to associate them with multiple VPCs.
Exactly. Yep. You should be able to log in, and I think when we can log into one of our accounts and maybe go through that. But yeah, once you go into your security group console, you will see VPC associations, and then you can start assigning it or associating it to multiple VPCs.
Got it. So I guess association only works in the same account. It's the sharing, right? That's why we have two features. So associating with additional VPCs, and I can't associate a security group of VPCs in different accounts. That's probably the ultimate answer, right? It's a no.
Yep, that's right.
Got it.
I'll put here feature 1 because we're whiteboarding feature 1. Okay, cool.
Yep.
Maybe you put the name. So the feature 1 is association, right? That's the name for it.
SG VPC associations. So this doesn't have actually any impact whatsoever on quotas, the VSGs, on like everything remains the same, correct?
Yeah, so quotas are an interesting topic. So let's maybe unpack that a little bit. So first, I think as most of us probably listening to this who use security groups already know, as with most things, security groups, we talked about stateful firewall, so that we talked about some of the resources that they consume. So today, security groups have two quotas. There is what we call groups per interface, which is number of security groups you can attach to an interface, a single interface. And then you have rules per security group, which is number of rules that I can add to a single security group. And the product of both of those can't exceed your service quota. I think it's a bit unique because it's a combination of two, because you can attach multiple security groups to a particular interface. So it's enforced as a pair or a combination.
I think this one is default 5, right? Number of SGs interface, and this one is default 60.
60, yeah. Okay, they're adjustable, of course, but that's those are the default numbers.
So now, this one is X and this one is Y. It's just math. As you're increasing or decreasing these values from default, X times Y has to be lower than 1,000 or lower or equal than 1,000, right?
Correct, yeah. So you have some flexibility to increase or decrease them independently as long as they don't blow past 1,000. So you can have 500 into 2, or you can have 100 into 10, for example. So as long as you're not blowing past 1,000, you're fine. Now, in terms of quotas, to your original question, nothing changes. Like these X and Y quotas are still applicable. So if I'm attaching, for example, in my second VPC, if I'm using SG123, they still are counted as one SG that I'm using on an interface. So the quotas themselves or how they work don't necessarily change. Basically, instead of having to recreate SG123 in VPC2, it's already there. I'm just going to go ahead and use it. It'll still count towards my quota, but that's how it works anyway.
Are there quotas? Because I think there's a question here from Dominic about associating kind of across VPCs. is there a quota limit on how many VPCs I can associate a security group with? Or is it basically as many VPCs you allow me to create in a single account, I will be able to associate a security group with all of them?
Yeah, no, there is a quota there as well. So today you can associate an SG up to 300 VPCs. So fairly large number. If I'm doing more than 300, I think we definitely are more interested in some of the use cases there to see what else we need to do. But yeah, 300 is what we support.
Yeah, if you have one account with 300 VPCs, that sounds
I'd
like
be
you're doing
worried.
something wrong. Yeah.
We
I'd
will
be worried.
probably reach out to you before you get to the security group
Yeah.
quotas. We'll come to you and ask you, hey, like, what are you doing?
Yeah. Like
This
security group quotas are not what bothers me at 300 VPCs per
at
account.
that time, yeah, exactly. Cool. So this is a super straightforward feature. Love it. What are some use cases that you folks see common for this? Because we're always working backwards from customers and what customers are saying. So, Abby, you talked a bit about managing the same security group just once and making sure that you're not just proliferating security groups if they have the same rules. Have you folks seen implementations of this or plans for
Yeah.
implementations for this?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting use cases that I'm observing is as a lot of our large customers continue to grow on AWS, they started as a single VPC, single account deployment, and as their VPCs grow, because their business are doing great and they're acquiring more customers and like their VPCs are growing large, what we see is there's a need for them to now break up that one large VPC into several VPCs. And as we see that happening, they are now having to go and recreate some of those security groups across these new set of VPCs that they're creating. And it's getting hard to now make sure that everything is in sync, like all the rules, all the access policies are in sync. And that is where I think this feature is great, because now you don't have to worry about like security group management per se. Now I can split up my one large VPC into 2, 3, 4, 5 VPCs and then use the same SG across all. I don't even have to go and recreate a new SG. Whatever was there, I just now make sure it's attached to new resources within these new VPCs. So it makes management super easy. And even if I had to go make a change, I go make a change in the original SG. There's nothing that I need to do across new VPCs anymore. I think that's one use case that I think we hear quite a lot.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. There's a question from Dominic. I think this is a great one to tackle. Do we have any mechanisms to force the use of only shared SGs across the organization for compliance purposes, and assume only InfoSec and Sec team can create and manage SGs across the org?
I wonder if we want to clarify that maybe sharing is going to be discussed next, right? And we're just still talking about associations, so there's nothing to do with organizations yet.
Yep,
right?
yep. That's one.
Yeah, because when I heard about this use case first, and I think that's probably going to be a big misconception, I was like, oh, cool, I'm going to be able to share a security group associate with VPCs in my account, but also across other accounts. But that use case is not available, right? If I just have a bunch of VPCs in other accounts and I have a security group in my account, I can't have this security group associated with other accounts. That use case is something that's currently not covered. I'm assuming there's probably going to be customers coming out and asking for it. So we probably will be tracking that use case through feature requests. So let us know if that's something that you wish we had available.
And I think to cover the use case that you mentioned, Tom, and we're going to come back to your question, Dominic. You can still do you can still say, okay, I have multiple accounts, and you can take this and sort of duplicate it and say this is account 2, and I have security group. Let me do this here. So I have a bunch of other resources. Oh, I wanted the selection tool in this other VPC, and this is security group 4, 5, 6, and then I take it and I associate it with other VPCs exactly as we've done in account 1. So you don't necessarily, you can't share the security group with other accounts and them associating it with their VPCs, but you can, in each account, manage this one single security group that you then associate with all the VPCs in that account. So you can sort of find this the scaling pattern for multiple accounts.
But if
right?
you if I've seen a lot of customers who have a one account, one VPC setup,
Mhm.
where
Yeah.
they just like vend accounts and VPCs, then that feature is not really going to benefit them, right? That's not
Correct.
the target
Yeah.
customers, right? You
Correct.
need to have multiple VPCs in the same account to really get value from the association.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think in addition to that, the one account, one VPC model, I think also promotes a different kind of mindset around security. Because this is kind of why you're going towards this model, right? You're saying each application gets its own account, gets its own VPC, and we're going to manage security and access and policies and IAM roles completely, including network policy, right? For that VPC and for that account. I see where the feature of saying, oh, I have some enterprise level managed security groups that apply to all of these accounts comes into play. But that's the part that's not here yet. Cool. Now, any gotchas here? Any things to know about this feature?
Yeah, a couple of things. Now, if you have a default security group, you cannot associate that to multiple VPCs. Probably understandably so, because every VPC will have a default security group anyway, so it gets a bit murky if you do that. The other gotcha also is that you can't associate a security group with a default VPC itself as well. So default VPCs and default security groups are out of the boundary of associations.
Cool.
Probably makes sense, right? Because we typically advise customers to dump the default VPCs and not use them.
Yeah, the default VPCs are great for, hey, a long tail of small users. I don't want to deal with networking. I want something that I just click a button, or when I log in, everything is there and it just works. This feature is for customers who are scaling up, and then they need the tools to easily scale. So they wouldn't be using default VPCs or default security groups to begin with anyway, because they're too limiting in what they can do.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Awesome. Cool stuff. I want to make sure that we get time to also demo these features. So let's jump into the second one. And if you folks have more questions, please let us know in the chat. For everyone who joined a bit later, we are talking about the very recently, hot from the oven, launched VPC security group features, security group associations, and sharing. We just launched them yesterday. And yeah, we've gone through the first feature, security group VPC associations. Now let's head to the second one.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about the second one. So I think we touched a little bit on how security groups today, before this feature, is tied to a VPC and an account. So we talked about VPC. Let's talk about account a little bit. I know some of this questions already coming in, so let's tackle that. Now think about, let's say maybe a few years ago, we launched this feature called shared VPC, sometimes also referred as shared subnet. Essentially, what you're doing is you're taking a subnet in your VPC and you're sharing with another account. So the account that owns the subnet is called the owner account, and the account that I'm sharing a subnet to is called a participant account. Then now I can use that particular subnet, and essentially what happens is I'm living like a participant. Essentially, will live in that VPC. So that's why it's called a shared VPC. Great feature. I think a lot of interesting use cases. A lot of customers actually are using it, and we actually are seeing quite a bit of uptick in this particular use case. Now, that was great, but when it came to security groups, hey, great, now I shared the subnet. Now an account 2 is trying to create resources, attach ENIs, etc. They have to go create their own security groups. They can't just use a security group that was already there within the owner account. Now that posed a few challenges, right? The owner of the subnet or VPC has no control into what security groups are being used, and the participant accounts are going and creating their own set of security groups. There was no way to have a uniform set of rules between owner accounts and participant accounts. And that posed a bit of a challenge, especially when there were changes that need to be made. The owner had to make sure that offline those changes were incorporated with all the participant accounts, and then that posed a bit of a challenge and quite frankly some operational churn as well. So we to solve this, what we have launched yesterday was a feature called shared security groups. Essentially, the concept is very similar to a shared subnet, where now I can take my security group as an owner, and I can, through RAM resource sharing, I can create this as a resource, and I can share it to all the participant accounts within my org. So any participant account that belongs to the same org can now use that security group that is being shared. So I don't have to go recreate the security groups, and also owner of the VPC has some level of control in at least providing a base set of security groups. So participants are free to create their own security groups on top and then use it however they wish, but they do have access to these shared security groups that the owner of the subnet shares with them.
Well, that's awesome. Okay, so now I can essentially share the security group through Resource Access Manager, and the participant accounts and the shared VPC can associate the security group, so they can have their own security groups like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 here. But they can also have my shared. Let me put it in a different color here. My shared security group that I shared through RAM, right? So they can associate these with their resources as well.
And I think nice extension, right? Because when we launched the shared VPC or the VPC sharing, the idea was, okay, the owner of the VPC has a specific set of controls of what they can do, and we kind of stop them in the NACL level. So they can configure NACLs, they can configure routing, they can do a lot of things in the VPC, but the security group of the resources of each participant in the VPC they own, those participants had to manage their own security groups.
Yeah.
And I imagine there were requests of, actually, could we have some centralized security group that we can all also apply on our, maybe, a security group central team is managing that has all the rules for, I don't know, access from some tooling resource, IP address range, or things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the
So you're giving the owner of the VPC this extra ability to provide, I don't know if it's controls or like ability to create constructs that can now be a little bit more than just the high-level networking constructs in the VPC.
It's a combination of a little bit of control and also a little bit of ease of manageability from the participant account standpoint. What I mean by that is, like, think about before this feature, I, as a, let's say in this case, account 2, who's a participant, I need to ensure that I create a certain set of security groups that adhere to whatever that organization's rules are. And then I need to go apply my own things, because now I need access to another set of resources that's not common to all the other accounts. So in this case, we basically eliminate that need for account to kind of follow whatever the VPC owner's requirements are. The VPC owner creates and manages their security group requirements. They just make sure they have attached that security group to all the resources. And any change, ongoing change that needs to happen, If let's say owner wants to open up access or close down access, add a new protocol port, whatever, that automatically happens as long as that security group is attached to all the participant accounts. So ease of manageability from the participant account standpoint, and then a more control for the owner of the security group in this case.
But it's more of an option, right? So with as an owner of the VPC, if I create a knuckle, I enforce that knuckle on the subnet. Whereas with the sharing of security groups, I'm creating a security groups with rules that I feel everybody should have, and I'm going, hey, accounts 2, 3, and 4, here is a security group I would like you guys to apply on your things. But I don't, with just this feature, I don't have a way to enforce and say, you guys absolutely must have the security group. I'm just giving you an option. Here's a resource I've created. I would expect all of you to have it.
That's right. Yeah, and like this is not like strict enforcement. This is makes life easy, and there's some control. But of course, accounts have like participant accounts have flexibility to not use it or use open up more access on top of whatever is the default, not default, but the shared security groups.
And we do also have ways to enforce this, right? So I think probably the most common question that came up after we launched this feature was, how does this work with Firewall Manager and security group policies that you can configure in Firewall Manager to ensure that certain rules are applied and certain security groups are present on resources. And I think here's where these two new features plus Firewall Manager and security group policies come to complete the picture of simplifying management, but also enforcing certain rules and certain policies around security groups for resources across the organization.
And I think there's some interesting use cases along with AWS config as well. Like let's say, in this case, the owner of the account wants to have complete 100% control on security groups. Anything that needs to be created has to come through the owner account. There are ways to control access using AWS configs to make sure those security groups cannot be created by participant accounts. Before, that was not even an option because the participant accounts have to create a security group. Otherwise, they can't reach out. But in this case, there is an option that opens up now where you have that option where you can start controlling that way too.
Really cool. Awesome. How about quotas? I think that's the interesting piece, right? Because now we have two accounts or multiple accounts that are involved. We have the owner account that's involved, then we have the participant accounts, and the quotas are account level quotas, right? So how do we make sure that the participants here don't go on their resources above 1,000 rules, which is the total number of rules that can be applied on an interface?
So as you can imagine, now this opens up a new dimension to quotas, right? Like, okay, most of quotas today are account level. So we are setting these quotas at the account level in service quotas. But now when you have multiple accounts interacting, it gets more challenging. Which quota do we apply? Do we apply the owners or the participants? So in this case, how it works is first, I think the quotas that we talked about, which is groups per interface and rules per group, they still apply in the sense that those values are still applicable here. But the way they're enforced is a little bit different. So if I have, let's say in this case, SG123, let's take it as an example. Let's say I have 200 rules in them, and I share it across, say, account 234. In this case, when account 2 uses that shared security group, for the number of groups that I can attach at an interface, we will look at both the owner and the participant's quota and then pick up which one is the lower. So let's say, for example, the owner's group per interface quota is 5, and the participants group per interface quota is, say, 4. We will apply the lower of the two, in this case 4, which is the participant's quota. So a participant can apply 4 groups in that particular interface when there is a mix of owner and participants, so security groups involved.
Let's do an example. I think it's going to be easier if you look at a table. And I'm gonna put this one here, and let's do a table stuff here. So let's say that, so we have these two quotas, right? The X, which is number of security group rules per interface. Let me move this one here. And then we have Y, which is number of rules per security group. And then we have what results in this. This is going to be our last column here. And hopefully I have enough space to put it on. So let's say that account one, which is the owner, how many rules per interface should account one have? Should it go with the default? Let's say it has 5, which is the default.
Yeah, let's go 5, and then let's say it can do Y. Let's say is 200.
200. Okay, 200 times 5. It's under 1,000, so we're good.
Yeah.
Okay, let me move this a bit to the left here because I feel we're wasting a bit of space. Okay, let's say that account 2 has the default, like 5 default, and they actually haven't gone and increased the number of rules per security group, so they're still a default, right?
Yeah.
Let's say that account 3 wants maybe 500 rules per interface, which means that they need to go lower on the number of security groups per interface.
So it's going to be 2.
Okay. And let's say that
And
account 4 has maybe 3.
Let's go more than 5 as an example.
Yeah.
So
let's go more than 5. Let's do 7.
It's actually quite interesting. Are we adjusting those limits in tandem? I always thought that in my head, and I've never seen it done on both sides. I always thought we are going, okay, we're going to increase your number of rules without changing your number of security groups, but the limit still applies on the interface. So I still have 5 maximum security groups per interface, but I have, okay, increasing the groups, but I get it. So you have to adjust both at the same time.
You can, yeah. So let's say if your default, which is 5 into 60, you still have room to independently adjust them up till you reach that point. But once you reach 1,000, you have to play with both to
makes sense.
Yeah. In this case, I think it's just 8, and maybe it's going to be what, 100 something. Let's call it 100 as Y.
Let me do here. Yeah, 1,000 by 8. What is the closest? Oh, 125. 125. My math skills this morning. Okay. Cool. So now what happens when, what is the resulting X
Correct.
when participant uses the shared security group?
Yeah. So let's take the first example, right? So in this case, account 2 has an interface where it is using SG123 and SG456.
Yep.
So in that case, it is going to be lower of the 2. In this case, X is same for both, so it's going to be 5. So no change for participant account A, account 2 in this case. So they can attach up to 5, and those 5 could be one of account 2 security group and 4 of account 1's, or it could be any number of combination between the 2 accounts. So
you can mix and match, right? The security groups that you associate within with a resource can be, some of them can be yours, some of them can be the ones that were shared with you.
Correct.
So are we applying lower on both? So it's 5x and actually 60y, or is y not being taken into consideration in this scenario?
So in this specific scenario, y is not being taken into scenario. The reason is the result will always be less than 1,000.
Got it.
So in any combination, it will always be less than 1,000. Now let's take the second one, account 3. So in account 3, it has a limit of 2. And when it is trying to attach, when account 3 is trying to attach SG123 on any of its ENIs, we will now look at the load of the 2. In this case, owner has 5, participant has 2, so 2 is what we will use. So which means that account 3 can attach only 2 interface or 2 security groups in that particular interface. So
Awesome.
Someone's at your door, Alex, or?
I
no,
don't
it's
know.
fine. It's mine. It's mine.
I don't know. They'll have to wait.
No,
Cool. So the lowest.
it's my door. They're waiting. Don't worry.
Oh, it's your turn.
All right. So now let's take a look at account 4. So in account 4, we have 8, which is higher, right? So than what the owner of the VPC has. So in this case, it will be 5. So we will enforce only 5 groups. Now, those 5 groups, as in the previous case, could be any combination between the owner security group and account 4 security group. Something to note here would be efficiency. I know a lot of like large users typically try to hit 1,000. But in this case, for example, you have, if you're allowed only 5 groups and you're using only one of the owners and the rest is yours, your efficiency is not great because you can't stretch up to 1,000. Ideal situation works great if all owner and participant has same quotas, but we understand that's not always the case and it's challenging, but this is how it would work.
Cool. Awesome. There's one question that I'd like to ask for us to answer before we jump into the demo. Hopefully we have time to show how this looks like. So the new feature cannot be used with TGW and Cloud VPC attachments, if I'm getting it right. Ken is asking. This is completely different from security group referencing. Very, very different use cases. These security groups, you can reference them if you want over TGW, over VPC peering. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. This is just the management piece of security groups in an account or across multiple accounts that are participating in a shared VPC. That's all. Nothing to do with VPC connectivity options.
And those capabilities, like you mentioned, are still used inside these too. Like I can have reference within any of these security group rules, and all of that still works fine. And there's another interesting use case that opens up with this as well, which is a combination use case, right? Like for example, I as an owner have shared the security group, but I can also use this across other of my VPCs. So I can enable both association and sharing at the same time.
Yeah. There's common use cases actually where participants in a shared VPC use referencing between them. So let's say that A needs to talk to B, and A is owned by account 2 and B is owned by account 3. A and B can say, okay, cool, I'm going to reference in my security group, your security group. That can be the security group that identifies A and B, which are 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8, 9, right? And this could be used as SG reference here to allow A to talk to B. But that has nothing to do with SG123 that is centrally managed and allows, for example, resource access from central monitoring tools, right? Nothing to do with
That's
it.
right.
2 separate use cases, and they can both be met.
That's right. And I think that combination gives a lot of freedom in how you can play around this. And it also removes the limitation. Let's say you have an SG today, and that SG has a bunch of references. You could still go ahead and share them or associate with them with other VPCs, and they'll just work fine.
Exactly. Awesome stuff. I'm super excited about this feature. Can't wait to play more with it. Can't wait to see what you folks have as feedback. Let us know in the chat. Reach out to us. Share it in DMs on LinkedIn, wherever you have the opportunity, in meetings with us, with your account teams. looking forward to hearing this feedback. And I see some of our old friends here. Thanks, folks, for joining us. Today we have 15 minutes left of our show. I would really love for us to go and look at how the console experience is for these new features. Should we do that, folks?
Yes, let's do it.
Awesome, let's do it.
While you're pulling that up, a couple of things I'll call out. This I know this is a question that came before, which is orgs. So sharing works within your org, so you can share it to any account within the org. That could be even multiple OUs. You can share between them. So that's great. And also similar to the association limitation or requirement, you cannot share a default security group because all accounts are default security groups, so there's no point in sharing them. And again, like we discussed, default security groups are either not used or used with very, very unique specific use cases. When you're using shared VPC, you tend to create your own security groups anyway. So so we don't support sharing of a default security group.
And Abhi, do you know if these features are already supported in CloudFormation? For those
Yes,
who are interested in automating this straight away.
Yeah.
Yes, it is supported in CloudFormation.
And Terraform, I'm afraid to ask.
I am not sure, but I'll go find out. It should be, I think, as part of CloudFormation. Typically, we do support Terraform, but let me confirm that.
I know the CC provider might kind of already have anything that's in CloudFormation, but
yeah,
I've heard mixed feedback about that one. So let's see.
Also, for just for everyone who's watching us or will be watching the recording, we usually do these demos in the console because they're very useful to get the grok and feel of how new features look like and what the experience is. But we highly recommend you folks automate the network. Don't go into the console and try to configure 10,000 security groups across all your accounts from the console, because it's not scalable and it's very prone to human errors and click errors. So that's it. You folks mentioned that I can share security groups and can associate security groups that are default. So let's see this. I think we just added these two new tabs here, right? Which is pretty cool. First is the associations, and then it's the sharing. And if I click on associations, I can see here that I can't do this with default security groups. Neither associations, no sharing. So not for default security groups, but let's say I have some other security groups here. I want to look at some of my existing security groups. You can do this with existing security groups, right? You don't have to recreate your security groups, your existing
Correct.
ones. These are some security groups that you folks see I've used here for some of my Cloud One demos. if you see the name of this account. So I don't know what this NSUS East One private is, but let's associate it. So Abhi, do you want to walk us through what I do now?
Yeah, for sure. So most of you are aware of the screen, right? So you can go to security groups, and then you will see other security groups. You can pick any one that exists there. And then what you see below is you will see two new tabs. So you have VPC association and then sharing. So these are new tabs. I mean, others are pretty standard. So when you go to VPC association, you can now click on associate VPC and start associating this security group with multiple VPCs. You will see a drop down here,
so cool,
which is all the VPCs you have in that region. And then you can pick any VPC here, and you can go
I
ahead.
love, Alex, that every single VPC you have has a V6 range attached to it.
Of course, like who you're talking to, Tom. It would have been shameful for me to share my console and not have IPv6 addresses on all my VPCs. So
yeah.
course.
And that's it. Like that's as easy as that. So you'll just go pick a security group and pick a VPC, and you can actually go and do multiple groups. You can click
Oh yeah,
associate again.
let me do this with all my VPCs here. Oh man, this is so easy.
Yeah.
Love it. Okay, cool.
Super
I just
easy.
associated
Now
with all my VPCs. Perfect.
Exactly. Now, if you have an ENI in any of those VPCs, you will see the security group as well. So if you go to EC2 console, if you're trying to attach ENI,
I don't have
or if
an
you're
ENI.
going to,
But let me remember what this ID is, and let me see if I can create an EC2 instance and actually select the right security groups.
And the workflow is pretty similar here. Like nothing changes. It's just that this security group also shows up as one of the security groups that you can now associate.
Okay, let me see here. So I want to do it in, it was an inspection because I associated with prod and dev and prod 1. So let's do prod 1 here. Auto assign IPv6 address, and I can do select existing security group. And now I'll see it. I should see it in my drop-down list, right?
Yes, you should.
Let me see here. I only see my default one. Maybe it takes a while. I'll refresh this.
Yeah, let's give it a minute. But yeah, essentially you should see your security
cool
within this.
I'll come back to this
now let's come
page.
Back. Yep.
Yeah, and let me open this in a new window, and let me see if I can share my entire browser. Here it is. Okay, awesome. So that I can flip between these consoles.
Yep.
So let me go back to security groups.
Yeah. So now can
I associate and share the same security group? I think I can, right?
You can, yeah.
Perfect. So now if I go to sharing.
Yep. So now if you go ahead and click share security group, it will take you, it looks like there's already a share going on. So you can actually go ahead and create.
I want to create a new resource share because I think this one is a service network resource share in VPC Lattice. So
go ahead and create. Yeah, go ahead and create a new resource share, and then you can add the name here.
Resource.
And by the way, I just want to call out that these screens that you're seeing now is what is a RAM resource sharing screen. So nothing's changed. What's new here is that you will see security group as a new resource that you can pick, and then it'll give you a list of groups, and you can select one, multiple, depending on what your use case is. And you'll go ahead and click next.
I have the default permissions here on the resource share. I can also configure custom managed permissions, right?
That's right. Yeah, you can, if you want custom permissions, you can create them here, and then
can I add in these custom permissions? For example, the ability or give permissions to the sharee, so the participant account, to modify the security group rules?
That's a good question. So we do not allow participants to modify the security groups. The reason is because they are shared across multiple accounts. It's going to be a little bit of a wild west if everyone starts modifying rules. So in this case, only the owner has the permission to modify the security group.
Awesome.
Now, to that same point, an owner cannot just delete a security group. Similar to how a security group functions, if it's associated to an ENI, you cannot delete that security group unless it's disassociated from an ENI. So even though owner has the permissions to modify all the security groups, until it's been detached from all the interfaces, the owner cannot delete them.
Cool. Got it. Okay, that's awesome. So let's do this. I won't actually be able to share the security group because I don't have an organization. But if I would have an organization configured here, I could actually do an AWS account. Let me see if I can find an AWS account here. It's gonna fail for sure, but at least I can go through the entire workflow. and I can add it here. And you folks can see that it was added to the selected principals. And then I'm going to click next, and I'm reviewing my resource share. And when I click create resource share, it's going to tell me that it's not part of the, I cannot share it outside of my organization. I have only one account in my organization, which is just this account. So you folks keep that in mind. If you don't have organizations configured, and if you are not sharing it with accounts in your organization, you cannot share accounts. You cannot share the security groups outside of the account. Really, really important, and it's actually a very good security feature. Very, very important for that. Assuming we've shared it, actually, we could do one thing. I should not have left that. I could have just created a resource share without any participant accounts.
That's true.
Let me do that really quickly. Security groups, and I'm going to select my security group, share it. I'll just do exactly the same thing we've done so far. Just do a test here. I'll just do security groups, and I'll select my security group. Next. I don't want to do any accounts, and create resource share. Perfect. And now I have my security group shared. And if I go back to the security groups here, I can see actually the resource share, right? Yay, I can see it here.
Yes.
This is great.
Yep.
Awesome.
That's easier done. And all these resource share workflows are just like how you would share a subnet or any other resource. And once you go through that workflow, now you can see that this security group is now shared.
Awesome. Can I see as an owner, can I see all the resources my security group is associated with?
As an owner, you can describe all the interfaces where it's used. So you do get the resource IDs where they are associated. But of course you cannot remove them or delete them if it's associated.
Awesome stuff. I think there's a question in the chat related to my dark mode here. You can do it here, dark mode, light mode, or browser default. I love the dark mode. Sorry for those of you who don't like it. I love it. So this is my default. Awesome stuff. Any questions, folks, in the chat? I don't know if we've answered all of them. This is pretty straightforward, super simple, super straightforward. Not too many hoops of configuration.
Somehow we still spent an hour and a half on this. I don't know how that happened.
Yeah, well, we love to talk.
You know what they say. It's the simplest of interfaces is the most complicated, always. One last thing before we drop, I just want to call out that there are a list of services that work with these features. Do refer to AWS to maintain a living list of services that work with these features. And then we'll keep obviously adding support for these features with other services.
Awesome. This is great. Perfect. I was pasting here in the chat the links to our documentation to make sure that you folks have it. And as usual, let us know if you have any questions. Looking forward to meeting you next Thursday. I think
we have a partner joining, so I'll update the page. We're gonna talk about VPNs, so I'm hosting next week.
Perfect. So join us next week. Tom is going to be your host. Then we're going to be talking to one of our partners on VPN. And until then, happy holidays, happy Halloween, happy Diwali, and see you soon.
And I think one more note. I think it's still going to be daylight savings time. I don't know when. I think California is another week. Right? So there's 2 weeks of a time difference, and then we're back to the same difference.
Yep. See you soon, folks. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.
See you.